Hi, everyone. Just want to say hello. Hope you're doing well on this day. I hope you're feeling healthy and you're happy, even though we are in a new environment and a new normal, perhaps. This is the digital town hall for the Canadian Women's Foundation. We just wanted to get this opportunity to speak with you, to show our faces, to give you a bit of an update. I have with me my colleagues. I'll ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Paulette Sr.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paulette Senior. I'm President and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. Great to have you join us for this digital town hall today.
And we'll move to Keitha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Keitha Mercer. I'm Director of Community Initiatives and Grants at the Canadian Women's Foundation, and really happy to be here.
Thanks, Keitha and Paulette. My name is Andrea Gunraj, and I'm Vice President of Public Engagement at the Canadian Women's Foundation. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I see more people coming on, and that's great. You join us, and we're just going to launch right into it because we have just a half hour to give you an update on everything that's happening. Please know that this session is being recorded, and we will be sharing it after the fact with you and with other folks who maybe weren't able to join us right now, or maybe wanted to join us, but the capacity of the webinar was too full and couldn't. So I just wanted to start by saying, if you didn't know, and I'm sure you know, the Canadian Women's Foundation is Canada's public foundation for women and girls. We were started in 1991, and we've done a lot of things to support women and girls to move out of poverty, out of violence, and into confidence and leadership. I want to just begin with a land acknowledgement and an action statement. This is something that we try to make sure we do every time we meet online, even online. The work of the Canadian Women's Foundation, of course, and the organizations that we support all over Canada takes place on traditional Indigenous territories. We're very grateful for the opportunity to work and meet on this land, but we recognize that land acknowledgements like this are not enough. We do need to pursue truth and reconciliation and decolonization and allyship in an ongoing effort to make right with all our relations. So we are just going to launch into it, and I'm going to advance a slide. Oh, I never did that already. Thank you for coming. We're going to move on to some updates. Our COVID-19 response is really the focus of this digital town hall. I think it's really important for us to speak to what's happening and what we're seeing out there. And I know that you folks also had questions around that. So we'll be also taking the opportunity to ask or answer those questions. And of course, along the way, if you have more questions that you would like us to answer, please put it in the chat box. If we don't have the opportunity to speak to it, please know that when we send out the recording after, we'll try to make sure that we touch on your questions, at least in some way. We're going to move on to talking about just a couple of upcoming activities that we think you might be interested in. And we are also going to do that short question and answer period, as I mentioned. So moving along, COVID-19, we're going to move to the response of the Canadian Women's Foundation. And I just need to acknowledge that a lot of organizations are doing incredible things. And the Canadian Women's Foundation, we want to just thank you all for doing what you're doing in communities and give just a bit of an update about what we're doing on our side. So I'm going to pass this to Paulette. And if you could just take us through this beginning part.
Sure. Thank you, Andrea. Well, maybe I'll just have a few opening comments before we get into the meat of the matter. I think it's important to acknowledge that, these are times that we've never experienced before, as a country, as communities across Canada, and even as a world. We haven't had this kind of exposure. We haven't had this kind of pandemic since over 100 years. And so we're living in different times. We're all doing our best to keep going, whether we can work from home or those essential workers who still have to go in. And so I think it's fair to say that this has affected every aspect of life as we know it, and will probably change our lives for quite a while to come. And so we're really just doing our best in terms of ensuring that as the Canadian Women's Foundation, We are keeping front and center the women and girls that we support and partner with organizations across the country to provide services to. And we're doing our best to ensure as well that we can channel as much funds as possible during this pandemic to ensure that they're keeping their doors open, that they're serving the most vulnerable, and that we are encouraging both government as well as philanthropists and folks who are able to support this work to support the work that we're doing across the country. So perhaps I'll leave it there and then we can get into the rest of our conversation.
Thank you, Paulette. So one of the first things that we really wanted to do is address how gendered this pandemic is. I'm going to pass it on to Keitha to speak to some of that.
Yeah, I mean, it became immediately clear how the unique gendered impacts of this pandemic. We saw an immediate increase in gendered poverty. As we know, women work in a lot of the service industry jobs that were immediately affected. We saw an increase in unpaid caregiving work. As I'm sure many of the people listening have kids at home, are taking care of parents, that kind of thing. We saw an increase in gender-based violence immediately. For people who are managing violent relationships, being stuck in quarantine at home was immediately increased that. Not to mention the stress and challenge of being in quarantine. And we immediately saw less access to services for women, girls, trans, and non-binary folks because all of our organizations, all these organizations needed to close their doors. And the financial stress of non-for-profits who provide those services was immediate as fundraisers were canceled, etc. So the foundation started using our voice as widely as we could to draw attention to these implications of the pandemic within the first week of quarantine, and talking about what it looks like for community-based partners. We worked with our government connections in the media, wrote blogs, etc., to start to talk about what the gendered impacts of the coronavirus was. And you can find some of this information on our blog, and lots of other great stats and things that we pulled together. So I definitely suggest looking that up. There's been a lot of interest in this subject and an encouraging recognition of how important it is to view this pandemic from an intersectional gendered lens and understand how different people are experiencing it and how we need to respond. So, we're all in this together, but this is not impacting us all the same way. And that's something that we've worked really hard to show. It's been important for us to show that these are not new impacts. This is a deepening of cracks that were already existing. So women, trans, and non-binary people have experienced these inequities over decades. And the pandemic is making things more difficult, but not necessarily introducing a lot of new things for individuals, groups, and communities. So, as I said, the cracks in the ways that things have been done from work to home to schools to communities are being deepened through this pandemic. So the Canadian Women's Foundation is working hard to connect with the community organizations we work with and our partners throughout the country to hear more about the regional specific impacts and share those as much as possible. And as I said, please check out CanadianWomen.org/blog to find out more about the work we've been doing about the gendered impacts of this pandemic. Should I move on to the next one?
Yes, please, Keitha, go ahead.
All right. So as I said, we've been doing some work already on this. And one of the things we launched immediately into quarantine was a survey because we wanted to better understand the impacts of the pandemic on the organizations we work with in every province and territory. And these are programs that provide women, girls, trans, non-binary, and two-spirited folks programming that such as economic development support, violence prevention and intervention, leadership and empowerment programs, This includes shelters and sexual assault centers, job training programs, youth programs on violence prevention, like our Teen Healthy Relationship work, mentorship programs for girls, STEM training, so science, technology, engineering, and math work with girls, and much, much more. We suspected that the pandemic's impact was going to affect their ability to function and deliver services, so which is why we sent out this online survey, and we found that 80% of the service providers who answered were concerned about their capacity to deliver services in this pandemic. We also found that a significant amount of organizations were dealing with staffing and volunteering shortfalls, program shutdowns, and bigger costs such as increased cleaning and personal protective equipment purchases. So they needed to divert a lot of their funding to new special services to reach their clientele, increase their staff's access to technology at home, like I said, cleaning, food for their communities, etc. So it's there's a lot of shortfalls in organizations' budgets and an increased need to figure out how we're going to support.
Thanks so much, Keitha. And I think it's really important for us to move from this data and looking at just the gendered impacts and into action. So I'm going to pass it to Paulette to speak to some of the government response that we've been trying to move and encourage along the way.
Thanks so much, Andrea. So yes, we've been very actively involved in speaking with government. We've established some solid relationships with a few departments, and so we've been able to demonstrate our willingness to step up and partner with government, as well as with our sister organizations who are collectively, we're doing our best to ensure that we providing government with the information that they need to ensure that they're making decisions that are important to and inclusive of women during this pandemic. So a gendered lens is really what we put forward. We provide them information about the impact of the pandemic on women, and we have been happy to see that the federal government has provided COVID-19 aid with a gendered lens to help organizations that serve women and girls to keep moving and providing programs at the grassroots level. And this has been very helpful in ensuring that critical funding can get to the grassroots level. The first priorities that they identified was to get critical funding to women's shelters and sexual assault centers. And since then, to date, they have approved another $10 million to support GBV organizations to ensure that not just the shelters or sexual assault centers, but organizations are also providing grassroots gender-based violence services across the country can also access funds. And so altogether, the Canadian Women's Foundation has received $13 million in emergency support funding. We are getting those funds out quickly and turning them around quickly. So we've done that with the sexual assault centers. We're now doing it with the GBV organizations. And partnering with the government to do that. What else can I say? The government has also provided aid to women's services through sister organizations such as Women's Shelters Canada, who was able to get those initial funds to shelters across the country. And this, I think you'll agree, is a really great start in terms of ensuring that our services are not forgotten. We know that this has not always been the response in times of economic downturns, and so to see that response include not just the charitable sector but also the women's sector is very important. So we will continue to dedicate our energies to advocate for a gendered specific aid and to ensure that the government is including that, because as we know, this is not just about some of us, it's about all of us.
Thanks, Paulette. And what's really encouraging as well too is that alongside the government response, our responsibility as a foundation is also to move philanthropy towards where it needs to go. So Paulette, I'll ask you to speak to the Tireless Together Fund.
Sure, sure. So I have the unique privilege of working with some really smart women, and I would also say that we were able to shift quickly into the gear that we needed to do in order to ensure that not only were we helping to direct government funding to our sector, but that we were also raising dollars through philanthropic means to do that. So at the same time as the government was providing funds, our role that we took on very clearly was to ensure that we were providing opportunities for those who are supportive of this work to also give. And the requests were coming, so we had to respond very quickly. So we know that there are people out there who are very focused on ensuring that we don't lose the gains that we've made already in terms of gender equality. And so they wanted to be able to contribute. And this is why in quick time, we were able to launch a Tireless Together Fund, which is a national emergency fund to support women's organizations that are delivering services. And so the goal is to raise funds from donors, corporate partners, and philanthropists to provide more critical support to women and girls and through COVID, because of the COVID-19 crisis. And so it was very helpful to ensure that we can get these funds immediately to women's organizations. And some of the areas that folks are telling us they needed the support in was in terms of staffing and volunteer shortfalls, to be able to provide wraparound support such as childcare and food and transit, to be able to help organizations that would need safety supplies like gloves and masks and cleaning supplies. Operational costs such as rent and utilities were also important. You know, maybe I'll just pause there to say one important critical aspect that a lot of the organizations that we fund, or just organizations delivering programs to the sector, is that they would have had a lot of their fundraising events canceled. And for some organizations, it's up to a third of their revenue for the year. And so it becomes really critical that we're able to help them to not just keep their doors open, but to help in terms of as many areas as we can. And so operational costs like rent and utilities become important so they can keep their doors open. Digitization of services for physical distancing is also important, because organizations who can provide services working from home are able to do that, but they need the resources to do that. So we launched the fund in early April, and we're so grateful to report that to date we've raised over $200,000, and it's a perfect time for us to start getting money out there. So this is good. We've reached an important point where we can say we've raised this money, and so by mid-June we will be releasing the first round of support. We're focusing on smaller grassroots programs that may not have received aid from other sources, government and others, who, as you know, might be most at risk of shutting down due to increased needs and pandemic challenges. And these funds are going to organizations we already support to help make sure that they can keep doing their good work with women, girls, and their communities. So this is just a beginning. We will continue asking for generous partners, donors, and friends to give us a tireless, to give to the Tireless Together Fund in the coming months, because we will need those funds as we begin to talk about coming out of COVID. Organizations are still addressing issues due to COVID, and so they will need these funds to be able to continue keeping their doors open, and we want to be able to support them to do that. This is a difficult time for many, for all of us, some of us more than others. So if you're able to give and would like to join this effort, please do so at CanadianWomen.org. Every support, every dollar that you can give will absolutely make a difference to the lives of women.
Thank you so much, Paulette. Really appreciate that overview, and really thankful to everybody here who's listening to us or sees this after, thank you for your donations. We know that lots of people gave at a tough time, and you gave because you care about these issues and you care about folks who need this support right now. Women and girls, trans and non-binary people, and communities, entire organizations and communities are benefiting from this. And as the fund continues on, as Paulette says, it's just a start. We hope and really ask for anybody to support so that we can keep using this opportunity to make sure organizations get the work they need to do done in communities. I'm going to just quickly speak to our Signal for Help campaign. I'm mindful of the time and I want to have some good time to answer your questions. One of the things that we've mentioned is this possible increase in gender-based violence. We're hearing a lot of organizations saying about an increased need. There's more requests for supports. There's more people calling them saying that they're experiencing violence. There may also be, ironically, less people calling because they're trapped at home or they're confined and social isolation. And it was really important for us to try to do something to raise awareness and to provide tools. So the Signal for Help campaign was something we recently launched with a partner named Juniper Park. They are a communications company, and they came to us and they said, hey, what can we do together to address gender-based violence? We know that more people are using video calls now for folks who have that internet connection or who are doing those video calls. And this is just a very simple sign that people can do on their screen to show that they need support or they need somebody to check in with them. So I'm just going to do it really quickly. And it's just something that people, if my colleagues can help me do, it's a one-handed sign. It shows that I need somebody to check in with me. It was very important for us to try to do something, to use this opportunity to speak to this raised increased violence that we're seeing. Now, I want to just stress that this is one tool of many tools that people may use. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. There are people who do not have access to video calls, who do not have good internet connection, who might not have the hand mobility to be able to make the sign, who might not even have the space and the privacy to use the sign. As you can see, I did it really quick on my screen, but some folks may not even be able to do that because they're being monitored so closely. So we just have to remember that this is not a one-size-fits-all. And as I've been saying all the time, there's no substitute to being a safe person. There's no substitute to reaching out to your friends and family and say, hey, you reach out to me if you need anything. I'm not going to take over for you. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to blame you for what you're going through, but I am going to support you. So I encourage you to go to canadianwomen.org/signal-for-help and check out the Signal information, but also you'll see listed some services and supports in different regions that you can reach out to. Knowing these things, I think, is very powerful because people may come to you and say, you know, I'm not ready to go for help right now, or I'm not sure. And you can just give this information. It can be life-saving information for somebody. So that's a Signal for Help support. It's available on that page. Any organization can use it, adapt it to their community, however they feel they need to use it. It's available in English and French and Spanish for now, and we're sharing it around the world. We have a lot of great partners all over the place who are using this in their communities and promoting it and taking the opportunity to speak to the issues. And really quickly, Keith, if you could speak to our Resetting Normal reports.
Yes, happy to. So we are thinking a lot about what recovery will look like and what it will, what our new normal can be. Our goal is not to go back to what we had before because that was not a great normal for many, many people. So we're launching these reports to help decision makers and thought leaders understand where we could go instead. We're calling them Resetting Normal reports, and they're exploring risks to human rights that have been exposed by the pandemic and proposing new ways to build a more gender equal country in our recovery efforts to really think about what kind of world we want to live in post-pandemic. The first one was released and focuses on, key elements of making things better, which is a thriving, well-supported women's sector that can meet community needs. So thinking about what kind of, funds are required and what a women's sector, a well-funded women's sector can look like. So I really encourage checking out this report. There's more coming on canadianwoman.org/resetting-normal.
Thank you, Keitha. So just quickly, I want to address what you can do to stay connected and contribute if you're interested in doing something with us. And I think this is fun. We are doing a lot of Facebook Live events. We're using the opportunity as we have to connect through digital, might as well use it for some really uplifting content that might be interesting to people who are following. So I want to encourage you to join us this Friday at 1:30 p.m. EST. We're going to have a candid conversation with award-winning author Sharon Bala. She wrote The Boat People. It is a beautiful book. And we'll speak to her about what this book was about, some of the issues in the books, what it means to be a Canadian reader and a Canadian author, and what she's doing to really draw attention to issues of human rights and human dignity that very much align with what we are interested in at the Canadian Women's Foundation and what you're interested in as well. So join us this Friday at 1:30 p.m. You can check out facebook.com/Canadian Women's Foundation, and all the information is there. And I also wanted to point out for you, the Calgary Marathon is coming up. The Calgary Marathon is usually a marathon that you actually participate in person, but now it's turned virtual. And for those of us who are in the Calgary area, you might be wondering what you can do with this. Well, you can still do the marathon on your own time and fundraise for the Canadian Women's Foundation. All funds are going to go to our Tireless Together Fund, but you do it on your own time and you do it in a safe way that allows you to social distance. So I just want to encourage you to go to the Calgary Marathon website, and it's just calgarymarathon.com, and sign up there if you're interested in this. We'd love for you to participate in this way in your own time. You can even do it on a treadmill, I'm told, which is interesting. I would say I did it on the treadmill and not actually do it and fundraise and just be done. But that's me. I'm not a runner. And we're just going to quickly use the last few minutes to address some questions and answers. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to help with these as well. These were really excellent questions that people submitted ahead of time. One person asked, which organizations are tracking data on this impact? And I think that's a really excellent question. Data has been, in some ways, a little thin. It's an ever-developing situation, but I want to draw your attention to Statistics Canada. They have actually a COVID-19 portal with a lot of stats on all kinds of things, but on different communities' experiences with COVID-19 and their reactions, the things they're worried about. It's a very diverse website, has a lot of information. Statistics Canada, just Google that, COVID-19, you probably should be able to find it. And there's also Public Health Agency of Canada. They've had some really interesting facts listed there, and I see stuff all the time. I go to that all the time. CanadianWomen.org as well, too. If you go to our website, you'll see a fact sheet on women and pandemics. We're trying to just put some more information, especially that lines with our work, so that people have access to what is the unique gendered impact in Canada for women and girls, and what do we have to do about it. There was another question as well. I thought this was a really interesting one. How we are addressing, or how to address, young girls who might be in isolation, experiencing maybe unsafety because of increased use of social media, of using the internet more, and any kind of unsafety that might happen in that context. Keitha, I would love to just ask if you have any awareness of what organizations are doing right now to address that issue.
Yeah, a lot of organizations are moving their youth programming online. So Instagram Live, Facebook Live, finding ways to connect with young people in other contexts. And we fund a lot of programs that work with girls on, deconstructing these images, talking about media literacy, talking about online life, which is, part of young people's lives no matter what. So, as we're getting a little further into quarantine and organizations are starting to figure out their technological capacity, there's starting to be more and more access for good programming for young people to connect with each other and connect with safer adults to talk about these sort of things. So I highly recommend looking at our grantee lists for both Girls Fund and Teen Healthy Relationships. I'd say the majority of those organizations are starting to figure out how to connect with young people, and there might be one in your region. But if there's not, the bonus is that they're online. So so you might be able to connect your young folks in with them. You know, I know it's starting to be like late in the spring, but I think these programs are going to continue running despite the end of the school year because no one's in school anyway. So so yeah, I would definitely suggest that.
So thank you so much, Keitha. We're at 2:30, and I want to be really mindful and respectful of people's time. There were a couple more pieces or a couple more questions that we didn't get to right now, but when we send out the recording of this webinar, I'm going to just give you a little bit of information for those questions that we didn't touch on. Some we did in the course of the conversation. So I hope that answers some of your questions about what we're doing right now. Just to let you know, on Thursday, we are having a digital town hall that's in French. Somebody did ask, are we making this available in other languages? So we do have a French one that's focused on, particularly on Francophone communities and where this COVID-19 response really intersects with what they're going through and what they're seeing. So I just want to close off by saying thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this. I want to thank Paulette Senior and Keitha Mercer, my excellent colleagues, for joining. And yes, stay tuned. You'll see some links. You'll see this link to this webinar, and you'll also see some of the questions that you asked that we didn't get to. So have a great day, and please take care of yourself and be well and safe. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.